So we are ready to start our last topic now on how to get started and how to succeed with a business architecture practice. So we'll start with role in organization and then talk about how we build a practice and then end with where do we go from here. So a question that has probably been in a lot of people's minds is where should business architecture report and what does the team structure look like? So I have a view of a best practice business architecture team structure here. And what you see here is a trend that's been going for quite a number of years now, worldwide. We see it written about in many different places, including research analysts. But that is a business architecture team reporting to a business leader. And so in this particular case, the team is reporting to a business strategy or transformation head. And there's a couple things that make a really good leader for a business architecture team to report to. One, they care about end-to-end strategy to execution. And two, they work across business units because that's where the value proposition of business architecture is really strong. So for that reason, we see a lot of business architecture teams reporting to, yes, sometimes C-level leaders on the business side, but very typically strategy leaders, strategic planning leaders, transformation leaders, because they fit both of those characteristics. And in the rest of the structure here, so there is a center of excellence. Business architecture lends itself very well to having a center of excellence, or COE. And that center of excellence is reporting to the main leader here. And we can have a centralized team where all the business architects report to that same leader. Or we could also have a sort of a hybrid, as I'm showing here. So in a hybrid, we also have business architects reporting to individual departments or business units. What makes the hybrid structure a really powerful one, and when you get started, a really good place is centralized, right? So you have all the business architects together. You can do a lot of collaboration, right? You're smaller, get your foundation. And while you can stay centralized, as the team scales, a hybrid is helpful because you can permeate the organization a lot more because you have business architects reporting in the different business areas and they have the relationships, right, and the visibility to what's going on. But we can also architect change at a pretty grand scale because we have architects in the center, maybe focused on groups of capabilities or certain enterprise focus. And then we also have business architects in the different business units bringing that lens. So the examples of transformations that I gave earlier in the case studies, they leverage a structure like this very well to scale. But we always have the challenge because, remember, business architecture lives in two worlds. Yes, it's a part of the business, but it's also a part of the enterprise architecture umbrella. So there's almost no perfect place to report unless all of enterprise architecture is reporting to the business. So if the business architecture team is reporting to a business leader, then we've got to make very, very close ties with the rest of the IT architecture team. Especially application architects, data architects, which may be reporting to an EA leader in IT. And while that sounds challenging, I've seen organizations do a really good job at this, and it starts with the leaders. So when I've seen this done really well is the business leader and the enterprise architecture leader, they do everything together, right? They're communicating together. The roadmaps are integrated, right? They bring the team together frequently, and they really build the culture of collaboration from the top. So any organization structure is possible. I've also seen organizations do some pretty interesting things at scale, like an organization that is made up of different operating companies, but they have an entirely virtual center of excellence. It actually doesn't report to any one place, but they share a business architecture across those operating companies, across separate legal entities, and they bring it together, and then they have the different business architecture teams in each of the operating companies. So as much as I can say this is a best practice for obvious reasons, right? With the strategic positioning of business architecture, this puts us right square in the center of where change is happening with strategy, transformation, what the business is doing. But as much as this might be a best practice, every organization has to start where they can start and do what makes sense for them. So on the other hand, I've seen amazing teams where the business architecture did report in the IT department, or they were, business and IT architecture report to a CTO. The CTO has a really close relationship with the business people. So it also depends on the organizational dynamics. So as much as, we're seeing the shift of business architecture teams reporting to the business, and that's a good reason for a lot of obvious reasons, you got to do what makes sense for you. It's also common that business architecture team structure shifts over time. It may incubate in IT or as part of the enterprise architecture team, but then it ends up moving to a business leader as it matures or kind of settles in and finds its place within the enterprise. Or we might see a business architecture team that started centralized and then it moved to a hybrid, as I alluded to earlier. So lots of things are possible. We always need to keep our business focused no matter where we report. We always got to think enterprise, and we always have to build relationships with both business and the rest of enterprise architecture and all of those important partnerships that we talked about earlier. What do business architects do is a key question. I know you've sort of picked up on that for either your personal knowledge or the things we've talked about today. But I like to say an architect is a professional who facilitates macro-level design of the organization, macro-level decision-making, design, and alignment of the business and technology environment to support an organization's goals and strategies. Of course, there's a lot wrapped into that, but that's really what we're doing as our organization changes, realigning the business and technology environment to be able to achieve that and making sure that we can deliver on the value proposition to the people that we're serving. So at a very high level. More specifically, business architects sort of cover these three areas that you see here in blue. The most important thing, the reason why we exist, is to deliver value, leveraging the business architecture, and to help other people to do that. That is the guiding light, hands down. But as part of the role, there are two foundational components, and that is building and maintaining the knowledge base and also building out the practice. So we're really doing all of those things. A diverse business architecture team is I think the strongest one, where you have people, different levels, different personalities, different backgrounds, different competencies, right? We all come together. And you'll find people, sometimes people will lean more towards one of those areas versus another. A lot of people just like to get out there and solve problems and design things with the architecture. That's the applying business architecture for value space. And that requires a lot of competencies to do that. We not only have to be good at architecting and designing and mapping, but we also have to have a set of cognitive competencies to solve problems and really think through things. And then also communicating and relating to people, right? To be able to convey concepts, to help them understand where we are and paint a picture of the future and inspire people to go there and invest in the change. Building and maintaining the business architecture knowledge base really leans in on the business architecture mapping competencies. So principles and how do we represent an organization? And then the practice leader, or the people who will help to scale and mature the business architecture practice, they need to be really good at communicating and relating and conveying value and building partnerships and finding opportunities for business architecture to prove itself throughout the organization. And of course, each of those three aspects of a practice or of the business architect role, they'll take all of the competencies, but I've highlighted the ones that are more emphasized in each. Just to take a closer look at business architect competencies, you can see in the mapping thought processes and the ability to see patterns, to rationalize, abstract, analyze information, to be able to create context no matter what it is that we're doing, and to be able to define initiatives, to do road mapping. All those things fit in the mapping sort of a category there. Cognitive competencies apply to many roles, but certainly this one. Things like systems thinking, design thinking, problem solving, creativity, and innovation. And then we have communicating and relating competencies, both behavioral, right? So our personal characteristics like adaptability, emotional intelligence is quite big, but also group dynamics. So how do we communicate, or how do we visualize, storytell? How do we bring people together? And how do we influence and lead? All those are a big, big part of this job. And as I was saying earlier and sort of alluding to, as we have more and more automation and can leverage artificial intelligence, the emphasis becomes less on doing mapping and even more on applying and leveraging the human aspects of, helping people to see the possibilities and helping people to move through change. A few characteristics of business architects. And I like to share these. You may not agree with all of them, or maybe you see some other ones, but I always kind of say you can see a business architect coming from a mile away, right? And they embody these types of characteristics. The first is challenging status quo. So asking why, or couldn't we do it better? Abstracting and simplifying. So being able to see patterns, or, this seems, I know we're calling them different things, but these seem like similar things. Should we be working together? Thinking big picture. And we can't not see the big picture. We may, zoom into the details and zoom back out, but we're always thinking big picture. We connect dots and build bridges. And that's with information, such as in the knowledge base, connecting all those different focal points that we've looked at. But it's also connecting people and building bridges between people, between business and IT, between business areas, between different teams that are working together, just connecting the dots. And also learning voraciously. I see many people have come to this career after having an entire career of doing other things. And they come to the business architect role and they'll say, wow, I didn't realize there was a name for what I did, or this feels like this is a calling to me. I'm already doing these things. I already think this way. So always learning voraciously and trying to, like I said, challenge status quo and do things better. So establishing a practice. There's a lot we could say about that, but I'll share a few key points today to start you on that journey or give you some food for thought if you're already on that journey. But this journey of establishing a strategic business architecture practice, or the journey of establishing end-to-end strategy to execution, is a human journey more than it is an architecture journey. Remember the secret. It's not about the business architecture. Right? At the end of the day, it's about introducing new ways of thinking and working in our organizations. And the only way to the top of this mountain, at least as I've found and others have found so far, is one person, one step, and one win at a time. I have worked for organizations where the CEO brought in business architecture. And they had seen it in a company, or they had the thinking and the way they were wired, or their previous experiences that, it was a mandate from the top. But even in those best case scenarios that everybody longs for, you still have an entire organization. So you have the top and you have the bottom, you have everybody in the middle, but you still have to bring everybody on board to these ideas of different ways to think and different ways to work. So no matter what, that's why I say it's still a journey. That's one person, one step, and one win at a time. One technique I like to use as teams are starting out, or maybe they've been on this journey for a while, but they're stopping to introspect. But I like to have them complete a value canvas. And this is a thinking tool. This is not necessarily a socialization tool to share with others. When it comes time to explaining the value of business architecture to people in your organization, use infographics, use videos, use cool stuff, right? That's interesting and engaging. But this gives you the pieces to think through as a new or existing business architecture team. The first question is, what is our purpose? And if we had to pick a tagline that was catchy, that people would remember, what would we say? All right, so in this example, I have bridge, strategy, and execution. You can create a lot catchier taglines, and please do, but you get the idea. Right? If somebody asks you in a second, what do you do or what's the purpose, you and your team members can answer these types of things. So what's the overall purpose? And second, think through 2, no more than 3 business outcomes that business architecture is enabling in your organization. And the reason I say that is this is about the marketecture here, right? This is about explaining and socializing to people. So if you tell them that you do 7 things, like I've shared lots of uses of business architecture today, I shared a survey with a lot of ways, right, that organizations use business architecture. But if it's not simple and memorable, it doesn't stick, right? So 2, no more than 3 outcomes as you're communicating to people what you do. For example, effective strategy execution or better investment, maybe something catchier like do the right things for the right reasons at the right times. And from there, the next question is, okay, business architecture, well, we have other people in the organization that are doing these things. What do you bring to the table? So the next component to articulate is how business architecture helps. I won't read to you what's up there, but a real clear understanding of what you bring to the table to help strategy execution or to help with better investment so that people understand and it's differentiated. And who are the stakeholders that care about those outcomes? And importantly, how will you measure success and how will you measure the contribution of business architecture to that outcome? I'll talk a little bit more about measuring value because that's usually a big topic that's on people's minds. How do we measure it? How do we explain it? But it comes back to this. How we measure value of business architecture and explain it to others is very contextual. It depends on how you've defined your value proposition and your purpose and your outcomes and how business architecture is ultimately going to contribute to those outcomes. So some examples that you see here, time from strategic option idea to viability determination, or the percentage of initiatives that are strategically aligned. Those are things that we can actually measure business architecture's contribution to. And beyond that, I also have the business architecture services. So you'll remember I talked about architecture services earlier, and then here's where they come into some context. So you define the services that you're going to offer based on the outcomes that you are planning to deliver. And again, those services are so important to make architecture tangible and help people understand when and why would they contact you and what they're going to get. So strategic options assessment or investment decision-making support, things like that. So a tool for you and your team if you find that useful. The approach to starting and scaling a business architecture practice. I did articulate this at a high level at the very beginning, but just to come back to this, here's the approach for essentially building the plane while flying. Because most business architecture teams don't have the luxury of defining a team and a value proposition and doing a bunch of modeling and then, spending a bunch of time on that and then showing value. We kind of have to build and show value at the same time. So this, marries those two things together. You'll see this reflected in a roadmap for advancing a practice that I'm going to show in just a little bit, but this is the thought process. So if you're starting a business architecture practice, step 1, build an understanding of business architecture. And check, we did that today, right, in this masterclass. Step 2, define business architecture value and establish your team, even if you're a team of 1. So when I say define value, it's answering the questions that you saw on that value canvas in the previous slide and putting it in a format that you can tell it in a compelling way to other people. Once you've done that, and you can kind of see there's a dividing line there, if you get buy-in, right, and sponsorship to go on this journey, again, even if you're a team of one, but you've decided to do it, then we take the journey and we have these two parallel tracks that will continue to unfold throughout your business architecture practice. So the first track there is developing and applying business architecture for value. So, all right, we know what we're doing. We started with why. Now we have to build a business architecture baseline. Capabilities, based on information concepts, value streams, and the cross-mapping between the capabilities and the value streams. So bringing these ideas back up again one more time. Once you have that baseline ready, well, now you're in business. And now moving to step 3B, you can start applying business architecture for value in your first usage scenario. You deliver on it well, you tell your success story, you show others what it looks like, build advocates, and you come around again. So step 3B is the little cog that drives the entire machine here. It's our guiding light, which is how are we delivering value with business architecture next? And how are we doing it next? And how are we doing it next? And as you see, step 3C, that's just enough, just in time. So as you have a need for more information in the repository to support the decision making you're going to do next, in step 3C, you add it. So if you need to do some strategy mapping or tying to applications or journeys or, again, whatever it is of all the things we've looked at today, you add it in step 3C, you apply it to the scenario, deliver value, tell your story, build advocates, and we come around again. So step 3B and C are an endless loop, which is also why your business architecture is never done. It's living, it's breathing, it's expanding to meet the needs of the business and how it changes. The bottom track there is supporting what we're doing as we develop the business architecture and apply it for value. So the bottom track is maturing our practice. And I'll talk about the components that are included in that in just a second. But the bottom track is on more of an annual rhythm. And so in step 4A, we're going to assess our business architecture practice maturity. We're going to measure our results. How well have we done so far? We're going to define some business architecture practice improvements. We're going to execute on those through the year, and we're going to come back around. So I'll show you the business architecture maturity assessment. It's an important tool that helps us to understand where we are, how we want to mature the practice next, what we want to have in our business architecture practice advancement roadmap, whether that's creating formal role definitions through HR or training or bringing in a tool or making some integrations with other teams. That's the stuff we're going to deliver on all year. And then when it comes back around to the end of the year, we're going to assess maturity again. So again, with the practice track, it's still just enough, just in time. So if you have 2 people on your team so far, you don't need a 200-page playbook, right? So you can calibrate your practice advancements according to what you're doing in the top track. You continue to see these 3 components. I talked about it with the business architect role. You see them here, you'll see it again. But again, there's 3 aspects of a practice that always need to be in balance. Are how we're applying business architecture, and then our knowledge base, and then our practice infrastructure or our function. So that's how we build the plane while flying. Components of a business architecture practice, and you'll see these reflected in different ways in the maturity model. So for building and maintaining the knowledge base, we want to think about things like our business architecture content and our knowledge base in tools and our blueprints and views. We'll also want to think about governance of the business architecture. And there's 2 aspects to that. One is the governance of just the knowledge base and how we describe things. Maybe we want to change a capability name, or maybe we need to add a capability. That's one type of governance. But the big type of governance and the real thing we're after is what I talked about in the case study with the transformation. It's using the architecture as a way to describe what our futures look like, right, and how we're designing the organization, how they're going to change over time. The example I talked about with the Customer Experience Leadership Council. So governance, a key piece. And then as far as the practice, the reason why this is important is you are essentially building a new function, and you know that from the rest of enterprise architecture. All these things are all in common, so I'm not trying to create any division between business and enterprise architecture. We need to be lockstep. But the practice includes, planning, assessing maturity, and maturing with intent. It includes team development, community development, a lot of socialization, change management. I've talked about change management for our organizations, but we also have change management for architecture and business architecture. As we introduce these ideas, they create change. And the change not only comes from, hey, there's a new team here, what are they doing and how do they, what does that mean to me? But we are creating change in how people think and work. And that's the bigger stuff to manage, actually. So organizational change management applies as much to what we do as a business architecture team as it does to the organization. There's also value measurement, organizational alignment and integration, embedding into the fabric of the organization, and our architecture methods and playbook to make sure that we're delivering consistently as a team and delivering to the value and the outcomes that we've defined for ourselves. So that gives you a bit of a checklist on what do we do to build a practice. Here's the maturity model. This is from the Business Architecture Guild. It's called the BAM. The Business Architecture Maturity Model. And as all maturity models have, it's got levels across the top. So level 1 is not really much of anything. Level 2 is ad hoc. Level 3 is a consistent or defined. And level 4 and 5 are characteristics where the organization really has business architecture used strategically and is fully integrated. And then the categories are things like governance, strategy linkage, all the different mapping categories, the alignment to other disciplines, business performance management and using that capability assessment as part of how we measure performance and manage performance, communication tools, people, lots of stuff in that category, and business architecture and IT architecture alignment. So how you can use this, and the way I like to use it with organizations, you can do assessment of where are we today. And you can have this externally done or as a team. You use a maturity model. There are characteristics in each of the cells here so you can do your rating. And you decide as a team, where are we today? So if this is an organization, it's mostly, well, entirely at a level 2. That's where we are today. We got a baseline. And we can decide where do we want to go over the next horizon. Remember the roadmap, remember the bottom track that I had. So this is like the next year or whatever cycle you want to set for yourself. So where are we going? And maybe we really want to advance in a few areas. And so where we are today for that category and where we want to be in the future is going to guide us on what needs to be in our practice advancement roadmap. So if this organization wants to improve in business architecture mapping, maybe they're going to invest in building out some more value streams or building a capability map or expanding on what they have. If they want to move to a level 3 on tools, they're probably pretty ad hoc today, but now they're going to get an automated tool in place and they're going to move their business architecture baseline into that tool. Or if they're trying to improve business architecture and IT architecture alignment, they're going to spend some good amount of time to make sure that the business and the rest of the enterprise architecture team are aligned around purpose and value and roles and interactions and how we're advancing. So maturity model as a tool, it's also, of course, helpful to show progress to your leader, to other stakeholders of the business architecture practice. So with the maturity model in mind and sort of a focus on where we want to advance over the next horizon, again, just enough, just in time, we can create a roadmap around those things. So what's most important here is I'm again showing you that as you create a roadmap to advance your practice, one, that you're deliberate with it. That's the biggest thing we're doing. Otherwise, it's very easy to get pulled in a million things, especially when you're starting out. There's so much to do. There's so much to learn. There's so many people to talk to. But we have to be deliberate about creating a scalable and a sustainable practice that creates value. So the roadmap helps you to do that. The other key thing I'm pointing out here is that you see the three aspects of a practice coming into play again. We have business architecture development and application, and we have practice development on the top. So this is an example for a newer organization. So you can see there's time spent defining charter, hiring people. We're socializing from the very beginning, and we continue doing that. That's always part of what we do. And then we're building a baseline, and then we're going to start on the journey of applying business architecture. And then from this point forward, if you would see this team's roadmap for the next year, it's all about showing on the roadmap the applications of business architecture, and then they're expanding the knowledge base that corresponds with that. And again, other practice infrastructure as relevant. You can also see there's an activity to assess our maturity and create the practice advancement plan for next year. So we build that right in. So that gives you some idea on how to start. And so a good action item, especially if you're a new team starting, create a value canvas, and then start thinking about your practice roadmap, right? What does that look like for the rest of your year? Just a bit on measuring business architecture success. This is one of those million-dollar questions that I get all the time and people ask all the time. And a lot of people just want to say, all right, what are all the numbers? Show me all the numbers of what other companies have done, and tell us, if we invest in this, what do we get? What sort of numbers can we expect? And while those exist in a lot of case studies and research reports and things like that, they're not as easy, they're not as off the shelf as you would hope. But on the other hand, like I said, measurement of business architecture value is also quite contextual. All right? If your organization is, at least for now, leveraging business architecture for strategy execution versus simplification or streamlining, cost reduction, versus we're doing it so that we can perform a bunch of acquisitions consistently, those are all really different value propositions with really different measurements attached. That's why the value canvas is important, and that's why we don't always have an immediate answer to, all right, well, here's what you're going to do to measure value, right? So as you think about measuring value in your organization on your journey. And of course, this is important because you want to make sure that you're achieving what you promised, but also to help get buy-in, right? Measurement and showing results and showing numbers helps for buy-in. But you can think about measurement in some categories here. The first are tangible measures, and then we have intangible measures. And of course, everybody wants the tangible measures. So for tangible measures, actual metrics, right, numbers, you can measure value to the organization in context. You can also measure what I call ROBAI, return on business architecture investment. And that's just like what it sounds. So you look at the expenses of the business architecture team, the tools, the training, the whatever it is, which ends up being minuscule compared to the benefits that business architecture found, right, and created. And so to get the benefits, you do have to often manually calculate or just be mindful of, putting some numbers on the value so that you can quantify it. For example, if you were helping in the investment process and you identified a duplicate solution that was going to be built, right? You would maybe talk to, how much would we have spent? Is it okay if we calculate it like this, right? Or, hey, this compliance fine that didn't happen because we found this in our analysis together, how much would that compliance fine have costed if it would have happened, right? So you see, you have to get really kind of clever about how you quantify, and then you can calculate a real return on business architecture investment. Of course, other metrics, other numbers, even though people really want to see the value, but also being able to report on maturity of the practice can go a long way as well. So you can share the maturity model scores, or you can share things like how many strategic initiatives you're involved in. People will even track how much information they've captured in their knowledge base, right? So there's all sorts of things that you can actually track here. How many business architects you have, how many are certified, right? All those things can be, signs of progress along the way as you're continuing to deliver value. So that's the tangible stuff, but the intangible measures are also really important, as important, because we're humans, and this is about the stories, and stories resonate with people. So capture success stories, capture anecdotes or remarks by people. Maybe you're in a session where you're building a baseline. You're building out your capabilities and value streams, and light bulbs are going on for people. And they're saying things like, I never understood what happened upstream. I didn't realize you did the same thing I did. Wow, I never looked at it this way, right? And so capture quotes from people, share them if they're okay for you to do that. But success stories are important as well. So anytime you deliver value with business architecture and enterprise architecture, you complete some sort of engagement, take 30 minutes or 15 minutes to write a story. And in the story, it's only 3 paragraphs. What was the situation? What did architecture bring to the table? And what were the results? What were the outcomes? If you have numbers, even better. Or if you have a quote from somebody, even better. And then those success stories you can use to share with other people. And you can use to help basically show your value. And I love success stories so much because they also can create peer pressure. All right, so you did that for my peer over here. Maybe I should be doing this business architecture stuff, right? And they also help light bulbs to go on. People say, oh, you do that? I didn't know business architecture helped with that. Well, we have a similar situation over here. So again, if there's one practice I can encourage you to do, just capture success stories and start doing it today. And if they feel like we did something, but it wasn't big enough, capture it anyway. Your stories will get bigger and bigger, and I promise to somebody they will matter. So all of these things work together to help us measure the value and impact of business architecture. Just for some inspiration, and only inspiration, because this is so far from any sort of a complete list, just to say when we're thinking about value of business architecture, we can look at the overall business impact. Like I said, that's more contextual. We can look at architecture impact, so streamlining. Or maybe we had duplicate automation by a capability. We can, count things like that. Or we can count the impacts that we make downstream to planning or solutions. We can also do a stakeholder satisfaction survey, especially if it's hard to get numbers right now. Then get a survey of the people that you did engagements with. How did we do? Tell us about the value we provided. Get a architecture net promoter score, right? Which is, would you recommend architecture to a peer, right, to someone else doing this? So however you want to craft those questions, they also give you really valuable feedback, and people will often share testimonials in there. The other side of that, the green, is maturity of the business architecture practice. So like I said, maturity score, we can count things like scale, embeddedness, or how many conversations we had with people, or how many presentations we did around business architecture, whatever it might be, and then other measures of progress. So again, let these inspire you to a whole bunch of other things, but they'll get you started. So, starting to wrap up our journey here today, reflection on what is business architecture success. One of the best ways to see it reflected is, well, of course, when we're delivering on the business outcomes and the value that we said, but also when we start to see the mindset shifts and the ways of working shift within our organization. So some things we talked about earlier on, when people really are shifting to say, hey, what's the value of doing this? Does this make sense in the bigger picture and to the customer? When people start collaborating better across silos, when we're thinking big picture, when we're thinking end-to-end strategy to execution and organizational agility, when we're thinking about intentional design and doing so at a high level and doing so in partnership with all our teams, and when we're thinking business first, not just, what's the why? What does this mean? What does this mean through the business lens? Because anything we do with technology. Yes, it can give us strategic options, but it's always about the business, right? Those things always come back to the business. So really framing it there first. And just to recap some top business architecture success factors. Remember, successful business architecture teams are business and value oriented. We are in there working with people, delivering value, very hands-on, building relationships, co-creating. So define a clear value proposition for business architecture, deliver it via repeatable services, build the knowledge base and the practice just enough, just in time. Build strong partnerships, obtain sponsorship, executive sponsorship for business architecture as early as you can. But if it's not feasible, it will come if you continually deliver value. So the way I describe this is the things you have to get right are continual value delivery and integration with all those other teams, right? And building your advocates. Sponsorship, if you have executive sponsorship, it is the rocket fuel behind you, and you can really do some amazing things and a lot faster. But as I said, if that's not you, and that's not your situation right now, executive sponsorship will come by delivering value. Practice business architecture as a strategic enterprise discipline. And again, business architecture is a part of our broader enterprise architecture umbrella. We did the deep dive there, but all these things I'm saying apply to all of enterprise architecture. Position business architects for success, so make sure that they're reporting in a place in the organization where they have access to business people, they have access to business direction, that they can appropriately work across silos, they have the right level of authority and influence. And make business architecture for everybody. Back to the very early idea I was sharing with the knowledge base, but business architecture is just information about our organization, what it does, how it operates, where it's going, how we're going to get there. So that information is for everybody, and as you make it for everybody, you'll have a lot more buy-in and maturity around this discipline. So just a reflection for you to do. When we started this master class, I asked you to think about business architecture and write down some words that came to mind. And so as you go back to that, maybe you jot down some new words that came to mind. Maybe you think about things like strategy execution or design or working in partnership with other disciplines, whatever it might be. Maybe it's visibility, transparency, right? But just think now, what's your new mindset around business architecture and its power? So I'll share some next steps for organizations to move into action and then for individuals, because I know this has been a lot of information, so where do we go from here? There are two assessments that I think are nice starting points for an organization. One is just overall, how well do we do strategy execution, right? Are we getting the outcomes we want to get? Where can we improve? Where do we have opportunities? And then the second, especially if you already have a business architecture practice, is do a maturity assessment on it. You know about the BAM, right? The business architecture maturity model. So get a baseline, see where you're at, and again, with some of these new ideas and positioning, where do you want to go next? Where are your most important opportunities? Around business architecture as a strategic enabler and around strategy to execution as an overall concept, it's remember, one person, one step, one win at a time. So start conversations. Create intolerance for status quo. Paint pictures around the art of the possible. Build a case for change around both of those things. And then you just start making progress. I shared some good places to start. Translate a strategy, put a capability lens on the investment portfolio, put a capability lens on applications, but there are so many places you can start, and I hope you've gotten some ideas today on what makes sense for you. But just start applying business architecture, show what it looks like, bring people along, and keep doing it. Establish a business architecture baseline, so hopefully you've reflected on maybe any gaps you might want to fill or any tweaks, or if you're in perfect shape, then you are off and running to keep applying business architecture. And also think about how you're going to mature your practice over time with intent. Build partnership and integration, and of course, to make all this work, all these cool ideas, it does require tooling that enables data-driven strategy execution and capability-based planning. We can do a lot, and we always start where we can start. Right? So if you're on VEP, Visio, Excel, and PowerPoint, that's where we start. But to be able to really get the enterprise view and the full data, we do need an automated tool and make business architecture for everybody. So for you as individuals, some things you can do, I think, as enterprise architects, continue to further expand your business architecture knowledge and competency. Leverage the business architecture lens wherever possible. It might just be an addition on the things that you're already doing, just bringing that perspective. And of course, build close relationships and integration with your business architects, which hopefully goes without saying. Business architects, including people that are brand new to this journey, keep building out your competency, so again, thinking those three aspects. How do I build a knowledge base? According to principles, right? How do I apply business architecture? That's most important. And then how do I build a practice within my organization? Also, complementary skills are extremely important. So I shared a few things in a competency model, but for example, understanding strategy formulation, or just from an overall perspective, how businesses work, how business models work, how to innovate business models, how other related disciplines work. Learn about human-centered design, learn about organization design, learn about organization change management, all those things. Or if you want to get really deep in technology, do that. But we're connecting a lot of dots and building a lot of bridges, and we really need to be excellent communicators and influencers. So all those skills are really important. And again, hopefully goes without saying, but build close relationships with your enterprise architects and other teams. And for all of us, especially as our world continues to get more and more automated, focusing on delivering value. The mapping still has to happen, but the maps and the models are a means to an end, right? It's the value that we're really delivering with them that will make the difference. So for those of you who would like to really get deep in business architecture, I have a little bit of a success path here that I use. We build foundation, we build experience. But the key takeaway is what we're working towards. What's really interesting, as you become more and more senior in business architecture, you have more of a minor in business architecture, right, versus a major. You're using business architecture to frame things as scaffolding for the design. You're using it to, orchestrate changes and coordinate them across the organization. But you're solving problems. You're designing the future. You're working with tons of other teams, right? That's what this role is really about. So what we're ultimately working towards is mastering strategy, execution, and design for our organizations, working in concert with a lot of other people. I love taking people on this journey, both organizations and individuals. So if you're in this space, from just beginning to, strategically architecting, I do have programs that help you all along the way. So I wrote a book. It's called Strategy to Reality. That's probably one of your next best steps if you'd like to learn more. And I also have a platform called bizarchmastery.com, which is a gold mine of information. There are hundreds of articles, downloadable diagrams, podcast videos from all sorts of people, including practice leaders in this space that you can learn from. And those resources are free. So just like I said, requires a login. If you are starting on this journey in earnest as a new business architect, I have a program called The Inner Circle, which is more of a group coaching experience with me and other people like you. It's invaluable to help you sort of onboard and hear what others are doing in this space. For practice leaders that are establishing and maturing a practice, I have a program called Building a Strategic Business Architecture Practice. And there is a certification that I think I only referred to maybe in passing, but the Certified Business Architect, or the CBA, is from the Business Architecture Guild. There's right now just one level of certification based on the body of knowledge, but there'll be a practical one coming in the future. But some of you may really want to lean in and really learn the theory and learn the BizBot Guide and take that certification. So all those things, like I say, are best next steps. And of course, because you're the SAP community, always happy to share discounts on everything for you. So your last reflection is, where do you go from here after this day? What next steps will you take to help your organization advance business architecture, or introduce business architecture, or reintroduce or recast business architecture if it already exists or did in the past? And you personally, what next steps will you take to continue on your own learning journey from here? And what makes the best sense for you based on what you're interested in and what makes sense for your role? So I kind of picture the way ahead. We have a couple trains coming together here. We've talked about a lot of big ideas here today. It's about more than just the business architecture. So things like strategy to execution as an end-to-end process with accountability, or a strategic business architecture that is owned by the business and used to design and activate change. Those things ultimately need to be owned by and anchored in the business. And like I said, as more executives and boards and higher education adopt these ideas, I think we'll reach a tipping point. But every day, the tide is rising, both in terms of those audiences understanding and desiring these ideas, as well as the amazing practitioners and people like all of you that are actually doing this work and making it real every day. So even though the ideas need to be anchored and ultimately pulled and owned by the business, every single one of us plays a role, right? And I sort of picture when people will build train tracks like towards each other from the different sides and meet in the middle. That's what we're doing, right? Because we're also the people that can see the art of the possible, and we can see the power of architecture for our organizations. So one of the most important things you can do is be an advocate for change. No matter where you are, in what organization, your voice, your action, and your leadership matter more than we can ever say. So with that, we have now reached the end of our master class. I hope you found this to be valuable. I hope you learned a lot more about the what, the why, and how of business architecture. And I wish you all the best on your business architecture journey. And thank you all so much for being here. Best of luck.